It's that completely random time of the year again in which I bundle together games that won't be getting their own video and tell you all about them while you wait for the next lengthy juicy review. The next lengthy juicy review in this case will be of Icewind Dale 2 Enhanced Edition, in case you're wondering. If you have been following the channel for a while, you know that I use a system of tiers to classify the games that I play: the great, the good, the meh, the bad, and the ugly. And you probably also know that in these bundle videos, I go from the games that I liked the most to the games that I've liked the least. This time there are just too many games that I want to tell you about, so I am going to break this one in two parts. So without further ado, these are the games that I have been playing. Repella Fella. Repella Fella is a point-and-click, choose-your-own-adventure game that takes place in an over-the-top, post-apocalyptic, futuristic Australia. It's a humorous, narrative-driven title in which you play as different characters whose stories intertwine over the course of the game. The story itself is straightforward, unpretentious, and thrilling. The game features characters with believable motivations and problems who strive to achieve their goals and eventually confront other characters who have diametrically opposing goals and equally believable motivations. And in my book, that is the first piece of good news. You wouldn't believe how many stories are pushed forward by the unstoppable juggernaut that we call plot. For starters, Repella Fella reminds me of those good old Sierra series after they transitioned from text parsing to point-and-click in the 90s, and I loved all of those. The game's main selling point, however, is that your decisions matter to the point of there being several different endings. And I am happy to report that this is one of the few games that actually lives up to this promise. Most of the game's challenges can be approached and sorted out in multiple ways, and the options available often depend on your previous decisions, the items that you have collected along the way, and one very important decision that you make near the beginning of the game. The best part is that the most ridiculous and over-the-top way that you can think of to solve a problem is usually the one that has the best payoff and the most hilarious outcome. Repella Fella has a lot of high-quality replay value. Playthroughs aren't even that long, 12 hours give or take, and that's if you milk the game for all its content. But I have already sank 31 hours into it, and I can't tell you it gets better with every playthrough. Taking the role of 3 different characters, some of which have conflicting agendas, being able to overcome the game's various situations in multiple ways, and a pretty darn hilarious story with high stakes is already a good package in and of itself. But the way I see it, the thing that makes Repella Fella stand out in the crowd is that it seems to have run out of fucks to give about modern day sensibilities. Not only does it not care if it offends you, it goes out of its way to do it on occasion. And I love every minute of it. Where else are you going to find a game in which an NPC says, "I'll do it if you flash your titties"? And you get the option of saying, fuck it, and actually flashing your titties to get your way? Where else are you going to be given the choice of removing a house-sized wombat who has gotten stuck on a wall by sticking dynamite up his butthole and blowing him to pieces? In 2025? Nowhere. That's where. Come to think of it, you may not even get these things from Repella Fella if you don't hurry, if credit card operators and PayPal have anything to say about it. It currently goes for $9.99 on Steam, in my region at least, and for a fully voiced game with pretty good voice acting that you can play more than once and have a few laughs with, I think it's a pretty good deal. Ninja Gaiden Ragebound. I know Ninja Gaiden couldn't possibly be any further from the games that I usually cover here on the channel, but I was a huge fan of the original trilogy in the late 80s and early 90s. I must have played Ninja Gaiden 2 at least 200 times from beginning to end. So when Ninja Gaiden Ragebound got announced a few months ago, when I saw that they were going for the classic side-scrolling formula as opposed to Team Ninja's mid-2000s 3D presentation, and when I saw that it was a Dotemu game, the same guys who gave us Streets of Rage 4 and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge, I thought,
"Shut up and take my money!"
And I immediately set my expectations to one thing and one thing only. I needed this title to hit me hard with nostalgia, drown me in member berries, and take me on a sweet trip down memory lane. And after watching the credits roll, I can say it almost lived up to this expectation. It was 85% there. Now know this, I am simply not able to evaluate this game as a standalone title. If you don't include Mandragora, and yes, it's Mandragora, not Mandragora like some characters in that game say. I hadn't touched a side-scrolling game in almost 30 years, and I don't know how it measures against the top titles in the genre. But more importantly, I don't want to evaluate Ninja Gaiden Ragebound as anything other than a Ninja Gaiden game that's meant to be a throwback to the OG trilogy. And as such, I think it's a pretty good title. Not phenomenal, but pretty good. If you didn't like the original Ninja Gaiden trilogy, this game is going to do very little to change your mind about it. But if you did, and if you are curious about this title, then let me tell you about the things that I liked and that I didn't like about the game. Let's start with the things that I liked. First, it feels like a Ninja Gaiden game. Ninja Gaiden Ragebound was developed by the Game Kitchen, los mismos chavales que hicieron Blasphemous. So not Dotemu. Dotemu is the publisher in this case. But it's definitely got some of that Dotemu magic. And what's the Dotemu magic, you ask? Well, sometimes your brain unconsciously updates the memories that you have of those things that made your childhood awesome, you know, to keep them awesome. But the truth is that many of these things have probably not aged all that well, and that you might remember them a lot better than they actually were, especially if you compare them with their modern day equivalents. Mazinger Z used to be my favorite cartoon when I was a kid. And when I watched it again a few years ago, out of pure nostalgia, let's just say I wasn't impressed. Last year I picked up Streets of Rage 4 and I had an absolute blast with it. I played the campaign mode 3 times all the way through and I still couldn't get enough out of the damn thing. So I milked the endless mode for 100 hours more or so. And all the way through I thought, yes, this is exactly how I remember Streets of Rage. But then I did play the OG Streets of Rage again, and it was a lot clunkier and way flatter than I remembered it. And that's the Dotemu magic right there. They make these throwback games live up to the best updated memories that you have of your favorite game somehow. Ninja Gaiden Ragebound is no exception. In the original Ninja Gaiden, you had a lot more control over Ryu's movements than you had over the main character in most other side-scrolling games around its time. Bouncing off of walls in Ninja Gaiden and climbing them all the way to the top in Ninja Gaiden 2 felt seamless and satisfying, while the few other games around the time that had similar mechanics felt clunky and frustrating. And Ninja Gaiden 3 added cling mechanics to Ryu's already broad array of moves. Well, Ninja Gaiden Ragebound brings all of that back, and it adds a couple of new mechanics that fit the flow of the combat like a glove. And you can't help but think that these mechanics wouldn't have felt out of place in the OG trilogy. The guillotine attack lets you bounce off of enemies and objects, and you can use it to overcome obstacles, to dispatch weaker flying and floating enemies, and to shrug off enemy attacks. Remember that double airstrike that only those insane record breakers who finished the original Ninja Gaiden without ever getting hit could do? Well, now it does not require you to pull off a record-breaking, split-second timing mid-air cancellation. It's something that you can do regularly. Ninja Gaiden Ragebound also throws a dodge roll into the mix, and it feels super satisfying to use, especially when you upgrade it. And there is also a broader arsenal of situational attacks and special moves. Some of the old enemies are back, updated and upgraded, and you love to see it. And while you don't get any of the classic bosses, some of the attacks the new bosses do will be very familiar to those who played the OG games. I've seen some people complain about some of the game's design decision, but if I were a betting man, I would bet that these people didn't play the original trilogy. And this game is 100% meant to be first and foremost for those who did. I know by now games have mostly moved from touch damage, and people nowadays hate to see this in side-scrolling games. And it's understandable, but touch damage was the standard back in the day, and it very much was a thing in the OG Ninja Gaiden trilogy. And I don't think Ninja Gaiden Ragebound would have felt like a true nod to the original games if you didn't take damage when bumping into an enemy. So I was 100% expecting touch damage to be a thing in this game, and I don't think it's out of place in the slightest. I see some frustration in the review section of Ninja Gaiden Ragebound's page on Steam, and I think a lot of it comes from people who didn't play the original trilogy. See, for about half of the game, Ninja Gaiden Ragebound is a fast and furious run in which you jump and one-shot enemies as they come to you. But if you have played the original trilogy, you know you can't expect this to be the case all the way through. Some people complain that there are huge difficulty spikes, that there are armored enemies and enemies with shields that force you into rigid attack patterns, annoying flying enemies that you can't kill with melee strikes, and enemies that you need to crouch to attack, which according to these naysayers breaks the pace of the game. But the thing is that you had all of these things in the OG Ninja Gaiden trilogy. In Ninja Gaiden 3, there were enemies that required you to figure out their attack patterns and windows of opportunity. Annoying flying enemies were present in all three games, and enemies with shields were not only a thing in the OG trilogy, but also in the three games that came out in the mid-2000s. I also don't think the game forces you into rigid attack patterns. For example, killing armored enemies, or particularly sturdy enemies, is much easier if you use a hypercharged attack. But if you run out of time, or if you waste your hypercharged attack on regular enemies, you can always kill the pesky elites Mario style, or by throwing kunais at it, or by using your special skills, or by sacrificing some health to get a hypercharged attack. The problem is perhaps that the game reserves all of its most difficult enemies and challenges for the second half of the game, making the game feel too easy in the beginning and perhaps a little bit misleading about what you should expect for the rest of the game. But if you are an OG fan, you are probably going to be okay with all of this. Second, ranks, replayable missions, and non-mandatory operations. Just as in Streets of Rage 4, you get a report screen at the end of every level in Ninja Gaiden Ragebound. You get a grade that goes from D to S depending on your performance and on how many of the level's secondary challenges you managed to complete. These challenges go from killing the boss in one attempt, to not getting hit by X type of attack, to killing X number of enemies with X type of attack. And you can go back and replay any level at any given time if you want to get a better rank, or if you want to complete some of the challenges that you couldn't beat the first time around, or simply to replay a level that you found specially entertaining. You could also do this in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge, and I think Dotemu should continue to have this feature in all of their upcoming games. There are also a series of special operations. These are non-mandatory missions that are more difficult than your main path levels, but if you play them before the final stretch of the game, you'll unlock upgrades at the shop that will make your life easier and more fun. Third, the gameplay mix has been touched up a little, but it still feels true to the IP. Ninja Gaiden was a fast and furious series. It was all about going forward and killing things as fast as you could with precision while trying not to get killed in the process. Ninja Gaiden Ragebound is all of that and a little bit more. Puzzle solving has been woven into the gameplay mix seamlessly. Sometimes it's about figuring out how to get through a complex platform section, sometimes it's about killing a particularly pesky enemy, and sometimes it's about besting a boss. It doesn't always work in the game's favor, and it often plays like a game of trial and error that some would say breaks the pace of the game. But I found it challenging, refreshing, and oftentimes rewarding. Not always though, and we are going to talk about that later. You also have some levels that seem to have drawn inspiration from some other classic side-scrolling games from the 90s. There is a motorcycle level and a helicopter level that reminds me of the fourth act in Contra 3 Alien Wars. And there are secrety secret rooms with extra loot that remind me of Castlevania's level design. And this makes Ninja Gaiden Ragebound feel like a tribute to side-scrollers as a whole, and not just Ninja Gaiden at times. And I think this is very cool. Fourth, 2 characters and an arsenal of moves. In the original Ninja Gaiden trilogy, you played as Ryu Hayabusa and Ryu Hayabusa only. In the 3D series that came out in the mid-2000s, there were other characters that you could play as apart from Ryu, like Rachel, Ayane, and Kasumi. But I wasn't expecting there to be more than one playable character in a throwback Ninja Gaiden game that's clearly trying to pay tribute to the original trilogy. I like that there are character-specific levels and that they are tailored to the character's skills. At some point in the game, something happens, and from then on out you get to use skills from both characters. Ninja Gaiden Ragebound makes the most out of modern-day controllers, so you get to use several different weapons which get mapped to the various buttons on your controller. Though I still kept pressing up and the attack button simultaneously. Old habits die hard, I guess. Over the course of the game, you can collect scarabs, which is an in-game currency with which you can buy permanent upgrades and different weapons that you can equip on your characters. These weapons help you in various different ways, and it's worth trying all of them out. Fifth, the classic cinematic cutscene style is back. The OG Ninja Gaiden game was the first game that I remember that had cinematic cutscenes at the end of every chapter, and it blew my mind when I saw them for the first time. These scenes were presented in rectangles that sometimes transitioned into full-screen scenes. Well, those cutscenes are back, and their style has been retouched a bit. Sixth, the final decision and the ending. This is not a major thing, but there is one final decision that you make story-wise, and the playable epilogue that follows changes depending on that choice. And I really liked what they did for the epilogue and the credits, but I won't be spoiling it for you. Seventh, those sweet member berries. Oh man, this game is chock-a-block with sweet member berries. You get a reiteration of Joe Hayabusa's duel. You get to see the moment when he writes to Ryu asking him to go see the archaeologist Walter Smith. The shady CIA defector says that she was sent by CYOA, which was Irene's CIA name in the first game. The little sound snippet at the beginning of some of the levels, it's dripping with fan service, and I fucking love it, not gonna lie. I would have hated it if the game had used these member berries as some cheap device to launder a game designed by people who have little intention to pay tribute to the original piece, like so many other sequels, prequels, and requels these days. But that's not the case with Ninja Gaiden Ragebound, because this is a proper tribute to the original piece. Eighth, production values and music. You have some pretty serious animations in this game. Graphics were also pretty decent as a whole. I would say Streets of Rage 4 still feels like more of an upgrade over the original games than Ninja Gaiden Ragebound though. Locations in Streets of Rage 4 were more colorful and detailed, living spaces looked more lived in, and enemies had way more personality. But Ninja Gaiden Ragebound still scores pretty high in the league of throwback games. The music is pretty badass too, and it feels like it wouldn't have been out of place in the OG Ninja Gaiden game. And you even get some more member berries in the form of sound snippets. Remember these? Well, it's back. Ninja Gaiden Ragebound is not perfect though, and it wouldn't be a Yold's entertainment video if I didn't tell you about the things that I didn't like about the game. And there are 3 very big issues that I have with this game. First, you don't play as Ryu.
I'm sorry, what?
Not a great plan.
I think this is completely unacceptable. I truly think it is. Ninja Gaiden Ragebound is supposed to be a throwback to the OG trilogy, and Ryu was the protagonist in all 3 games. There weren't even other playable characters. The new Ninja Gaiden games by Team Ninja featured other characters, but Ryu was still the star of the show. You even get to fight him as a first boss for the tutorial mission, but you don't ever get to play as him, you play as Kenji, his stand-in. Yup, no Ryu for you because you've been a bad boy. That's what I felt the game was telling me with this weird choice. Second, the skill orbs are gone. In the original Ninja Gaiden trilogy, there were boxes or orbs or boxes inside orbs that sometimes contained special skills. And it was quite the tactical decision to break open these orbs or to give them a pass. After you played the level a couple of times, you had a pretty good idea about which was the most useful skill for the level and for the next boss. These skills were known as Nimpo techniques, and they included the flying fire wheel, fire dragon bolt, and of course my favorite, the invincible cheese wheel. But you don't have any of these in Ninja Gaiden Ragebound. You have plenty of skills, and rather than having any of the aforementioned Nimpo techniques as a single special talent, you have several different weapons and attacks that you can use in addition to your standard sword attacks. You can buy them as upgrades at Muramasa's shop, and you can equip them as secondary and tertiary talents, thus making the most out of all those buttons in your controller. But they are nowhere near as badass as your Ninpo techniques in the original games, because magic kicks weapons in the butt every time. And it also would have been cool to have all of these weapons at your disposal in the form of orbs like you did in the original game. Ninja Gaiden's additional weapons and talents are not bad, and they are very tactical, but I think the original talents were more fun. Third, the game is too damn short. Dotemu needs to make these campaigns longer, I swear. I had the same issue with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge. Yeah man, I was expecting at least a couple more levels. The OG Ninja Gaiden games were shorter, yes, but they had 7 areas. Ninja Gaiden Ragebound has 5 areas, and it kind of feels like it needed a couple more. Even the story feels a little bit rushed towards the end. Not that it's great to begin with, but still. Fourth, the story is missing a few Ninja Gaiden trademarks. Especially those, oh no, I didn't see this coming moments with all the build-up and payoff that went with them. Remember in Ninja Gaiden 2 when Robert T.S. pulled out a gun on Ryu and you thought he was going to shoot him, but in the last second he shot Dando the Cursed, who was just about to ambush Ryu from behind? Remember that trapdoor in Ninja Gaiden 3 that opened up underneath Ryu just as he was about to confront Clancy? Well, we don't have anything quite as impactful in Ninja Gaiden Ragebound. Sure, you still have some of the running themes from the OG games, like the CIA meddling in dark, occult, and mysterious matters, getting in the way of the good guys, and even capturing the main character at some point. You also have the defector CIA chick who helps the good guys, but instead of Irene Liu, the hot, young CIA agent who becomes an obvious romantic interest for Ryu in the OG games, you get this clown with a weeb mask. Now, if you have played other Ninja Gaiden games, you're probably thinking, so what's the big deal? The story in a Ninja Gaiden game is just about as relevant as Jim Belushi's acting career these days. But we are talking about a series of action games that introduced cinematic cutscenes as a way to advance the story in a video game in the 80s, and it was mind-blowing at the time. Ninja Gaiden Ragebound tried to do the OG trilogy justice, to be fair, and they almost entirely succeeded. Then I have a few minor nitpicks as well. First, the villains aren't as cool as the classic bad guys. Like, not even in the same galaxy. The Demon Lord is the final bad guy in this game, and he looks like he's been taken out of a funny Latin American folktale. Jaquio was pretty freaking scary in the first game, Astor was tropey, and he was never given any serious credible motivation to do his bad guy thing, but he looked menacing and sinister. And Clancy from the third game is totally underrated as a villain. He truly thought he was the good guy of the story. He even tried to convince Ryu to join his cause. The bad guys in Ninja Gaiden Ragebound are cartoonish by comparison, and I can't say I was crazy about any of them. Second, difficulty spikes, frustrating design decisions, and irritating sections. Now, make no mistake about it, I had a blast with Ninja Gaiden Ragebound. I think the game is worth playing all the way through. I think the special secret missions are worth doing, and I think it's worth playing again in Game Plus mode. But there are a couple of things that I find a little bit questionable. I think they could have mixed up the challenge a little better. Falling into a pit or not timing a jump properly and dying instantly as a consequence, having to figure out an enemy's attack pattern and making the most out of windows of opportunity, pesky flying enemies that make your life miserable, these things are all part of the OG Ninja Gaiden experience. Do consider, however, that this game was made by the Game Kitchen, and these guys love insta-death. And I do think there are a little too many insta-death situations in this game, even by the OG Ninja Gaiden standards. Unfortunately, most of these things are dumped on you altogether in the second half of the game, and that might be off-putting to some people who are not familiar with the OG games. I think they could have given you a taste of some of the more challenging enemies and more punishing platform sections earlier in the game. Also, those mandatory timed Kumori sections were decidedly not fun. I hated them. I did feel good, however, about overcoming them because they require you to get good, but there is just too much trial and error involved, as there is no way for you to anticipate some of the stuff that the game throws at you in these sections because you are given basically no time to react. These sections broke the pace of the game for me. They were rewarding, but I think they could have been designed differently. Which takes us to third. The two characters are a bit of a wasted opportunity. I like that you play as more than one character. I don't like that neither of them is Ryu, but I do like that you have two different characters with different talents, and that there are missions that are tailored to their skills. But we don't get enough out of these two, and there are just so many ways in which these two could have been put to better use, off the top of my head. First, rather than having timed sections in which you have to switch over to Kumori just to open a door, there could have been larger regular areas within a level. Areas with ethereal platforms that required you to switch over to Kumori to get through, and no time limit to finish them. Second, they could have done the Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse thing, and made it so that you could switch back and forth between the characters at will. This probably would have required the characters to be much different from each other, because the only real difference between them as they are now is that Kumori has ranged attacks. You could have made Kenji hit significantly harder, and maybe make Kumori the only one who knows how to drive vehicles, and then include vehicle sections in the middle of regular areas. Third, you could have brought back the clone technique from Ninja Gaiden 2, maybe as a purchasable skill from Muramasa's store that you could activate for 5 or 10 seconds to make Kumori appear and mimic Kenji's move with her range attacks, like the clones in Ninja Gaiden 2 did. Or you could have done the Streets of Rage 4 thing and let the player choose the character they wanted to play as at the beginning of each level. That would have required the story to play out a little bit differently, but the part of the story that the writers would have needed to rewrite is the worst part of the story anyway, so not much would have been lost. Ninja Gaiden Ragebound is a competent throwback to the original trilogy. It's fun, challenging, and it hits you hard with those member berries. It's a little bit too short, but in my region it goes for $11.24, and for that price I think it's a pretty good deal. But if you're not familiar with the Ninja Gaiden games for the Nintendo Entertainment System, and or if you are looking for a modern day side-scroller platform with a retro aesthetic, you might want to take a look at some late game footage to see if this is something you'd be interested in. But if you did play and like the originals, this is an absolute no-brainer, guys. Captain Bones Yo Mama.
He slept, he stole, he was rude to the customers. Still, there goes the best damned employee a convenience store ever had.
It's clunky, it's buggy, and it feels like it could have used a few more months in the oven of early access before its full release. But god damn it, I just can't put this one down. Captain Bones is an open-world, pirate-themed sandbox game with a few RPG mechanics and a lot of heart. The intro of the game shows your character living the pirate life, working as a cannoneer on a ship. But your career as an artillery person proves to be shorter than your average Gen Zer's understanding of basic history, because before you can say, oh, this indie game has an intro, enemy cannonballs tear your ship apart and you promptly find yourself at the bottom of the ocean. In a game that was not even made by Larian Studios, imagine that. The next thing you know is that you find yourself stranded on an island along with your savior, whom we are going to call Tutorial Lady for the remainder of this video. Tutorial Lady shows you the most basic mechanics of the game, and after making sure that you know how to use a knife to make a hole in a coconut, she tells you that you're ready to build a raft and travel to a nearby island to break her pirate friend out of jail.
That escalated quickly.
So you build your first raft and set off to this new island to rescue the poor bastard. You steal the key from the guard, sneak into prison, and break into his cell to find out that the guy is not only dead, and has been dead for quite a while by the looks of it, but he's also cursed. And it turns out that his curse is contagious, so the minute you walk into his cell, boom, you're fucked. And voila, the table is served. From then on out, you embark upon a journey to figure out how to break the curse and not die in the process. The curse itself is one of the best, if not the best thing about the game. During the day, you are this hot, young, and cutie pirate lady, or handsome man, but when the sun goes down, you inevitably transform into Ariana Grande. This totally not stolen from Pirates of the Caribbean concept is implemented as an interesting game mechanic. As a human, you can walk about villages and towns, buy stuff from vendors, and take up and turn in quests, but you also have to suffer all those petty little annoyances that make the life of a human pirate difficult. like being on the menu for sharks, snakes, and other creatures, and not being able to breathe underwater. But when the sun sets and you turn into 2025 Anna Taylor-Joy, regular people cower in fear when they see you approach, and soldiers attack you on sight, which makes trading and questing impossible. But you also get to enjoy the perks of being a skelly, like not needing to breathe underwater, and the fact that sharks and snakes no longer find you appetizing. And you also get to roam around forgotten, sunken villages and talk to other fellow skellies who would not be as amicable if you dared to go there in human form. And I think this totally not taken from Pirates of the Caribbean concept is quite fun in and of itself. But you also have a very simple RPG-like skill tree that lets you make the most out of this totally not Aztec curse. The first skills are filler boring perks that basically allow you to do some of the stuff that you can't already do as a human in skelly form, like being able to see, fight, and swim properly. But there are skills that allow you to go into skelly form whenever you want and play dead to troll the bad guys. Exploration is definitely the next best thing the game has to offer. There are plenty of islands and isles for you to explore, and they all have their fair share of hidden areas and secret places where there's treasure awaiting those with an adventurous heart. There are plenty of villages and settlements in this game, which is something that you don't usually find in survival games. But if you limit your endeavors to questing and trading when you visit these places, you are going to miss out on some of the most interesting little secrets the game has in store for you. In the first big island that you visit, for example, there are plenty of ladders resting against some of the buildings. And if you climb up those and jump around a little bit, you are likely to find a chest or two with some juicy, helpful loot. Take this one for example. This one takes you to the top of this building, where there is seemingly nothing to do. But what's that I spot? Are those planks nailed to the wall? These barrels look suspiciously like something that I can jump onto to reach those planks. Ha! Oh, look at that. Another plank over there. Bet I can use it as a ramp to cling onto that ledge. Nice. Let's shimmy all the way to the corner. I bet I can go around here. Huh, I bet there's a chest on that other side. Well, how about that? Looks like there is. The other thing that I find interesting about Captain Bones is that the game's critical path is mostly pretty awesome. Looking for a way to lift the curse will take you on a tour de force of keep pro quo missions that'll have you infiltrating pirate strongholds, diving into lost underwater cities and talking to undead, and running into all sorts of hilarious trouble while you try not to die and try to keep your pirate crew alive, fed, and happy. I also like that the devs seem to have tried to make the game first and foremost about questing and exploration. Everything else you do in this game adds to the immersion and adventure aspects of these two things. You usually don't have to go out of your way to farm X number of Y resource to craft some basic shit that you need. This game isn't about farming, and I 100% approve of this, because this is the type of thing that usually makes me say, ah fuck it, and tap out for good. Most survival mechanics are also kept simple and to the point in Captain Bones. Fishing, for example, only requires you to have a functional fishing pole. There's no need to make a hook, prepare bait, none of that shit. Making a campfire only requires some wood and a fire stick. And once you get that up and running, you can't just sit down and cook the raw fish and raw meat that you have in your inventory. You don't need multiple ingredients or recipes. And collecting resources in this game is super easy.
Barely an inconvenience.
Because there's plenty of everything almost everywhere. There are, however, a couple of notable exceptions to this. There is a quest that requires you to have a tier 2 ship. There is a ship upgrade feature, and said upgrade feature allows you to increase your crew capacity, your cannon capacity, and improve stuff like your ship's speed, durability, and damage. But in order to upgrade your ship to level 2, you must unlock all tier 1 upgrades, and you must also have enough money and resources to buy the overall ship upgrade. And this will likely force you to go out of your way to do a lot of farming. Shortly after that, you'll have to do a cooking quest that requires you to make 6 crab meals, which require expensive rare ingredients. And this is where the game can potentially become no longer fun. As you know, I usually sort the games that I talk about in these bundle videos from the ones I've liked the least to the ones I've liked the most. And I feel it's pretty fair to give Captain Bones a place in the podium, because I've had a heck of a lot of fun with it, But unfortunately, I can't recommend this game in good conscience because some of the game's core mechanics are way too clunky at best and straight out broken at worst. Let's start with little things like hunting snakes with a spear. Behold, dear viewer, because Sekiro, Nioh 2, Elden Ring, none of those games has prepared you for the level of combat that you are about to witness. That's how you kill a snake with a spear in Captain Bones, or anything really. I always find it frustrating when you can't jump to overcome the simplest obstacles in games, but Captain Bones goes in the opposite direction to the point of being laughable. Jumping is straight up broken in this game, but I can't say I hate it. Combat, for example, is a very important aspect of the game because you have to do a lot of it. I can appreciate the devs trying to simplify every mechanic in the game as much as possible, but fucking hell, there is a minimum level of complexity that some of these mechanics require to be able to work as such. To engage enemies in combat with your melee weapon, you have to click and hold your right mouse button. This makes you enter an attack stance of sorts that makes you walk slowly and hold up your weapon. And while you are engaging in combat, you can parry and attack with your sword. Stamina isn't a thing in this game, so you can swing your weapon endlessly and parry as many blows in a row as you wish without ever getting tired or punished for not timing your attacks properly. So because stamina isn't a thing, and because you are literally faster than every enemy in the game, except for perhaps sharks, if you get stabbed a couple of times during a fight, you can always drop the attack stance and run around a rock and have the bad guys chase you while you eat a couple of coconuts to replenish your health, like I'm doing here. And yes, Captain Bones is one of those games that you can farm endlessly for memes about video game logic. And as funny as that is, it doesn't exactly translate into rewarding combat. Also, every melee weapon works exactly the same, and the only difference between the enemies is that some of them can take a bit more damage than others, and some have guns that they will shoot you with if you get too far away. Stealth mechanics aren't a thing in this game either. You can crouch and sneak about, but enemies will always see you if you are near them, regardless of whether or not you are crouching. And when I say sneaking doesn't work, I truly do mean that it does not work, like at all. Crouching behind the crate makes no difference, crouching inside a bush makes no difference, crouching out of supposed line of sight makes no difference. And this is tremendously frustrating, because there are many missions in the game that are about stealing things, breaking and entering into places, and infiltrating enemy strongholds. And you'd think that stealth would be plan A for all of these missions, but stealth just isn't a thing in Captain Bones. On top of that, you can't do sneaky things while you are sneaking. You can't steal, open chests, or even enter places while you are crouching. Also, for this rescue mission, I would have preferred to infiltrate this pirate stronghold by sneaking my way around guards and obstacles, rather than having to pull a Sir Lancelot and butcher everyone in the way. Ship combat is also clunky and cheesable. My favorite tactic was to sandwich enemy ships between my own ship and the docks, and shoot at the enemy crew with my pistol from the safety of my deck while they ran around helplessly with their swords drawn. Also, your crew supposedly gets happier every time you sink an enemy ship, but aside from a sad emoji above their heads that appeared from time to time, I couldn't rightly tell when my men weren't happy about me not doing enough pirate stuff. But they only make the cheering sound and raise their fists in victory when you effectively sink an enemy ship. So even after gunning down the entire enemy crew and looting the ship's treasure chest, I still had to sink the damn thing with cannonballs to score simp points with my mates, because they just needed to see the damn thing go down to be happy. In my book, these things absolutely need to be fixed before I wholeheartedly recommend this game as a worthwhile investment of anyone's time and money. I am a filthy normie when it comes to survival games, so I walked into this one not rightly knowing what to expect. I wasn't hungering for this, that, or the other feature, and my standards were probably not that high, but I suspect those who are hardcore enjoyers of the genre, with thousands of hours under their belt in all those best-in-class survival games, or people who are looking for the perfect pirate experience, aren't going to be thrilled with the game's many half-baked and sloppy mechanics. As an RPG guy who's always on the hunt for games that offer some form of player agency and emergent gameplay, I can't say Captain Bones delivered anything noteworthy on any of these ends. The game is one big sandbox with lots of freedom and a lot of things to do, but it still funnels you into following a strict linear path in which you must also do things exactly the way the game expects you to. At some point you need a tier 2 ship to be able to go to a certain island, and there are plenty of tier 2 ships running around in the sea. But because the game wants you to upgrade your ship and do all the farming that it takes, you can't get a tier 2 ship in any other way. And the logic dictates that you should be able to board an enemy ship, kill everyone there and claim it as your own. But nope, can't do that. Also, the island that you have to go to for this quest is one that you can't reach just as easily with your tier 1 ship. But because the quest requires you to go there on a tier 2 ship, and you can only get a tier 2 ship by using the game's upgrade system, the NPC that you have to talk to in that island to advance the main story won't talk to you until you upgrade your ship and talk to the previous quest giver. So in the end, this particular quest in the main storyline is just a poorly designed feature check to force you to engage with the game's ship upgrade system. And why does it do that? To make sure you don't miss out on it? Also, there absolutely needs to be a way to disable quest markers on the accessibility menu, because they really water down the feeling of adventure and discovery. Also, why does the female MC says everything as though she wants to talk to the manager?
I can't do that right now. I need a hammer. This merchant doesn't buy such products.
All in all, Captain Bones is an unfinished, clunky, and buggy mess of a game. An unfinished, clunky, and buggy mess that I had an absolute blast with. The game definitely has charm to boot, and a couple of fun features and mechanics that you don't see every day, but it definitely still needs a lot of spit and polish before it can reach its full potential. And that's it. Those are the games that I have been playing part 1. Stay tuned for part 2, for that Icewind Dale Enhanced Edition review, for a video on the RPGs that came out in 2025 that didn't do it for me, and the follow-up on the RPGs that are doing it for me in 2025. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, thank you for watching all the way up until now. If you like what you are seeing on this channel, please consider subscribing and clicking that notification bell to avoid the usual YouTube shenanigans. Come check us out on Discord if you don't mind all the boomer talk that goes on there. I personally love it and wouldn't change it for anything. And share the video if you thought it was cool. Bye everyone.
You're excused. You can go back to playing video games.